Hi y'all, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about something that I don't take a whole lot of pride in, but it's something that was very important to my development as a person, and that was my teen metalhead phase. Now, if you are a heavy metal fan, don't be too turned off by me calling it a phase. While you'll certainly see what I mean when I call it a phase, I'm still a fan of heavy metal to this day, if you could not tell by going through my past videos. I'm a big fan of 1980s heavy metal, specifically thrash metal to hair metal to death metal, traditional metal, all that stuff. I listen to a little bit of the modern stuff, but definitely mostly 1980s to early 90s. That's like, my preferred era, the classic metal era. So I still listen to that stuff to this very day. I still like to play it on guitar, but there was a phase of my life, mostly in my teenage years, where it was my personality. And that's always something that, everyone goes through that as a teenager. You have a certain TV show or, artist that you like, or movie series, just some form of media, and it becomes your entire personality, right? And when I was in middle school, it really started in 6th grade and lasted through, I would say like halfway through high school maybe. Being the heavy metal guy, for some reason, was the box I put myself into, and it wasn't like anyone else put me into that box. No one else pointed at me and said, he's the creepy heavy metal guy. It was something that I brought on myself. The reputation I had at the time was my own fault, and so I'm going to be going through that today with y'all. Maybe y'all can relate. I'm just going to be sharing some funny stories about how I was at the time, what I look back on, what I cringe about when it's late at night, and your brain's doing the thing where it's like, hey, remember 10 years ago when you did XYZ cringy thing? Almost all of my cringy memories come from this period, so I'm going to be sharing that with y'all today. So my metalhead phase really started like a lot of folks my age. It really began in the late 2000s in what I call the Guitar Hero era. I am definitely a product of the Guitar Hero generation. Lots of guys my age, mid 20s, late 20s, like late millennials, early Gen Z, we definitely developed a love for classic rock, old school heavy metal, music that is before our time. We developed our love of that type of music through like the Guitar Hero games and through, exposure to the internet and stuff like that. And so I still remember, it must have been like 2008 or 2009, I was in 4th or 5th grade, and I was playing Guitar Hero 3 with my cousins, and there were a few artists that I recognized. I recognized Muse, Knights of Sidonia was on that game. I remember when that was on the radio. Linkin Park, I'm pretty sure, had a song in that game. Linkin Park was the first band that I ever truly loved. They were on the radio all the time. Metallica had one in that game. I'd heard of Metallica, wasn't like a huge fan of them yet, but I'd heard of Metallica. But there was one song on there that just blew my freaking mind, and that was Raining Blood by Slayer. Like, as soon as I heard like the eerie guitar intro, I was like, yo, this is something new. I have never heard this before. And very soon after, Slayer the band became my obsession. I remember back then, the old school iTunes store, which I still miss. I miss the early iTunes era. I loved the way it looked, and you remember the days when getting like a $10 iTunes gift card for Christmas was like the best possible present of all time. I spent a whole iTunes gift card on the Rain in Blood album. If you don't know what album that is Slayer's 1986 album that really sort of solidified their sound and is one of the most groundbreaking heavy metal albums of all time. And the reason I bought the whole album was because Raining Blood was only available as an album-only track. This was back in the days of iTunes where there were certain songs. If a certain song was super popular, you could only buy it if you bought the whole album along with it. So if I wanted to get Raining Blood, I had to buy the entire rest of the album. So little did I know, and little did my parents know, that I just bought one of the most violent, legendary, infamous heavy metal albums of all time. And so from that point on, I thought, being a heavy metal guy, that was my calling in life. And I went the whole 9 yards. I grew my hair long. I never had long hair before. I wore hoodies and jeans all the time, just looked super grungy, and this is really cringy looking back on, but even got into like the whole like pseudo-Satanism a little bit. Like in that era of heavy metal, a lot of bands were what I would call pseudo-satanic, where they sort of used like faux devil worship as like a marketing gimmick, kind of like, Iron Maiden with Number of the Beast, how I don't think the members of the band were actually devil worshippers, but they did that just to like, ooh, it's scary, and it caused public outrage, and the band gets more press that way. And Slayer were definitely one of those bands where I don't think they were actually devil worshippers, but they had the logo with the pentagram swords and the really cool configuration. Clearly, as you know, a marketing ploy, you know, marketing themselves as the most evil, heaviest, fastest band around. And so even though I was raised Christian, and I'm still Christian to this day actually, I really sort of like adopted that sort of style. I would, you know, draw like little goofy little pentagrams or goats on, like, you know, sheets of binder paper in my free time, not even knowing what I was really doing. And I guess there is a spiritual lesson there. Like, you should always have an awareness of what you're consuming in terms of media, music, television, all that, because you don't know how it's going to really affect you on a spiritual level. And sometimes I do wonder if my parents actually knew I was doing that kind of stuff, like if they knew what I was listening to and if they were actually just cool with it and knew I would eventually grow out of it, or if they were just completely absent-minded and like them watching this would be the first time they have heard about what was actually going on, you know, 10, 15 years ago. But yeah, I became obsessed with Slayer. And like, this is around the time I started playing guitar, and I got, you know, the Slayer tab book. And, you know, there are certain Slayer riffs that, you know, I practiced them so much back then, even though I have not listened to some of these songs in like years, because I'm not as much of a Slayer fan anymore as I used to be. I definitely kind of like grew out of Slayer, and I'm sure a lot of metalheads who clicked on this video would be like, oh, well, how could you grow out of Slayer? I just kind of did, you know. I'd say my favorite bands are more like, you know, Megadeth, Judas Priest, Overkill now, and I also developed an appreciation just for, you know, different, more melodic and traditional subgenres of heavy metal. But like I said, some of those Slayer riffs and melodies are just burned into my mind, so it's like I can just play them immediately when I pick up a guitar, even though I haven't played some of these songs for years. I have not listened to South of Heaven in probably 5, 6, 7 years, but I can play the intro with my eyes closed. It's just second nature to me because I practiced it so obsessively back when I was, you know, 11 years old. But going back to what I said a few minutes ago about how, you know, what you listen to can like affect you on a spiritual level in terms of like what you do and what your actions are, it definitely affected my appearance. Like I said, I started wearing like black more often. I wore like really dirty jeans. I wouldn't say neglecting personal hygiene, but like I just shed all care about modern fashion and modern trends, which on one hand is good. Like, you shouldn't care about, oh, I need to dress exactly the same as everyone else. Like, you know, you don't want to be a conformist, right? Like, you don't want to have to always look the same as everyone else just because society tells you to look that way. But there is also something to be said about, you know, looking presentable, looking approachable. Like, it shouldn't be a surprise, and I'll elaborate on this later in the video, it should not be a surprise that, you know, girls back then did not have crushes on me and not that many people wanted to be my friend, because I probably looked really gross and creepy. But yeah, it was definitely middle school, 6th through 8th grade that were my prime, like, metal is my personality years. And I really did, like I said, I put myself into that category. Like, for some reason, I don't know why, but it's like I went in thinking, okay, I'm gonna grow my hair out and I'm gonna, you know, dress super dark and heavy metal, and if people don't like me, then screw them, and then people don't like me anyway, and I'm introverted, and, you know, if people don't like me, screw them. And well, what do you know, if you go through life with that attitude of, oh, people aren't gonna like me, people are gonna be scared of me, and people actually are kind of like weirded out by you, it's like, you know, a self-perpetuating cycle. Like, that's what my social life in middle school and most of high school was. Like, my social ostracization was pretty much entirely self-inflicted. Like, I acted weird, I dressed weird. Like, it wasn't just that like I dressed like a metalhead and that I actually listened to the music, it's that I just, for whatever reason, I felt like I had to fill in the character gaps. Like, I was a character on a sitcom, like I was the heavy metal character. I had to act a certain way because, oh, that's what society wants me to act like. And in hindsight, like, I really am more surprised I wasn't the butt end of a ton of school shooter jokes. Like, if I can find pictures of my old middle school IDs, I will definitely put them on screen. But I was a scary looking kid, man. Like, obviously, you know, you don't want to judge based on appearances, but dude, like, if someone was scared of me back then, if you remember me back in middle school, like, I do not blame you at all for being creeped out by me. I was a scary looking dude. There's also the fact that I grew like 10 inches in 7th grade. I was 6 feet tall by the time I was 14 years old. So like literally between 6th and 7th grade, the summer between 6th and 7th grade, I probably grew from like 5'5" or 6 to like 6 foot flat or 6'1" in just a few months. I grew ridiculously fast and did not adjust to my body at all. I had horrible posture. So I mean, just paint this picture. Again, if I don't have pictures on screen, just paint this picture. You've got like a freakishly tall kid who grew suddenly. He's got long, unkempt hair, dresses in ratty jeans and hoodies. His face is riddled with acne. He doesn't have braces yet, so his teeth aren't perfectly aligned. Like, I was just not the most handsome dude in school, like not even close. And it didn't help that I kind of acted like a weirdo. I just kind of acted aloof and antisocial. And so I suppose the lesson I can offer from this part of the video, and you know, as I've learned and I've grown, obviously I'm in my mid-20s now. Like I said, I do still love heavy metal, but it doesn't define my personality. So what I've learned is you can definitely dress and be a fan of whatever you want, but it is still worth being an approachable and friendly person. That's something that I still struggle with to this very day, is, you know, not coming across as too serious or too intense. So now I'll share some of the cringier stories from this era of my life. As I alluded to briefly, I was not good with the ladies at this time. I didn't have a girlfriend until my freshman year of high school. Even that was like just a couple weeks thing because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I really only had one girlfriend throughout all of middle school and high school. I didn't have like a real actual girlfriend until college, actually. So right now I'll tell you about one time that, you know, a girl back in middle school really owned me hard. This is back in, you know, the era of Facebook when it was like actually really fun. Like for a while, Facebook was actually a great social media platform. It was easy to get started on. It was just a very kind of seamless, easy, basic interface. Now it sucks. Like I have barely used Facebook since 2017 because every time I log back on just to check on it, like I am just reminded of how ugly, grotesque, clunky, and how just horrible the interface is. I hate Facebook now. But back in like 2010, 2011, 2012, it was a really fun social media platform. And this is back in the era of like for TBH. That was the big thing. Well, it was not always like for TBH. It was always like for something, like for a compliment or something like that. You know, something stupid like that, you know, fishing for likes. And so one of the more popular girls in my school one time posted like for a song that reminds me of you. And so of course I liked it, thinking like, ooh, like what if I get like what if she like gives me like a really cool like song or something that makes me feel like, ooh, I really am dark and mysterious and edgy. And so you know what song she gave as her reply to me? Pumped Up Kicks. Oh, I don't know how I recovered from that one, man. It's just so bad. Like I said, I am amazed that I was not on the butt end of more school shooter jokes back then, but that was a pretty brutal one. It was definitely, in hindsight, definitely like a social L that could have been way more traumatizing than it was, but it's really not because of just how funny it was. Like you gotta admit, like that was a really funny joke. And speaking of Facebook, another cringy thing I used to do back then, I used to put like heavy metal album covers as my profile picture. I didn't even have myself as my profile picture for a number of years. One, because I was like really self-conscious of my appearance. Like, yes, as weird as that sounds, despite the fact that I pigeonholed myself into being the social outcast heavy metal type guy, I was very insecure. And so I just never had myself as my profile picture on social media until college, really. Of course, I was worried about privacy on the internet. My parents definitely hammered it in there, like you can't have any pictures of yourself out there. And so I would put heavy metal album covers as my profile pictures. And one time as my album cover, I set it as the Destruction album. Destruction are a old school German thrash metal band. I put their album cover for their 1988 album, Release from Agony, as my profile picture. I'll put it up on the screen right here, and you can see that's not PG, man. Like, if you see someone putting up art like that, you're thinking, okay, this is a weird person. If you're putting stuff like this as representative of yourself on social media, what are people gonna think of you? Be honest, okay? And I remember one of my very few friends at the time, like very shortly after I changed my profile picture to that, he was like, dude, take that down. What are you doing? Like, he was just very blunt and upfront, just like, dude, why are you using that as your profile picture? What's wrong with you? But yeah, I definitely, you know, had that self-fulfilling prophecy of I'm gonna be the metalhead kid, and oh, people are probably not gonna like me anyway, and well, surprise, surprise, people were kind of turned off by me, and I said, well, see, I knew they weren't gonna like me. One other very cringy moment came in 6th grade. For my English class, we had to do like some report about, I don't even remember what the assignment was, but the topic of mine was like heavy metal should not be banned. And the motivation was, you know, it was more of like a pro-free speech type of project, right? Where I said, you know, just because certain types of music might be seen as very, you know, countercultural or potentially violent or not child friendly. That doesn't mean that they should be, censored by governments, which is something I still, basically agree with. I would still say I value artistic freedom. And so to illustrate that, though, I read violent and disturbing heavy metal lyrics out loud in front of the class to kind of illustrate oh, despite the fact that this music might be, not really commercial friendly, it still has artistic merit. And so one of the lyrical selections I read out loud in front of the class for this project was from the old school death metal band Autopsy's song Charred Remains. And so here's the first verse. And remember, I read this out loud in front of class. So picture me and how I looked back then, reading this out loud in front of a classroom full of stupefied teenagers, okay? Burning from the inside out, bloody foam spews from your mouth. Smell the putrid stench of flesh as it burns you to your death. And yes, I thought I was very cool, very edgy, very badass for reading that out loud in front of the class as the teacher looked on in horror. I really thought I was sticking it to the man and proving something by reading brutal death metal lyrics out loud in front of everyone. And of course, another part of being an edgy metalhead is having really cool, scary shirts. I think back then I had a couple Slayer shirts. I had one with the album cover of New Order by Testament, and then one that I was really proud of was Spreading the Disease by Anthrax. And I remember one instance where I was walking down to the lunch tables. Because I lived in California, we didn't have a cafeteria that was covered, all the lunch tables were outdoors. And so I was walking into the lunch area, and I was walking past a kid. I had my hoodie zipper open so you could see the album cover. And if you don't know the album cover, I'll obviously have it on screen, but it's a guy on a doctor's table getting tortured by a bunch of medical devices, and he's screaming and oh, it's so dark and heavy metal. And I remember this kid, I walked by him, and he was chuckling with his friends and stuff like that, talking about whatever, and then he just looked at my shirt and he suddenly got serious and he was like, whoa. And I thought that was such a cool edgy metal moment. Yeah, this guy looked at my shirt and he was scared by it. Oh, I'm awesome, bro. I'm so mature for wearing shirts with heavy metal album covers on them when everyone else is wearing lame early 2010s graphic tees, with I don't know what, the Hangover Baby on them or something. Now what happened is over time, I definitely sort of more mellowed out in terms of my tastes. My metalhead journey was really kind of the opposite of a lot of people, I think. I think a lot of folks really get into the more mainstream, traditional heavy metal first, and then they get into the really brutal, heavy, dark, evil stuff, whereas for me, it was the opposite. Remember, Slayer was my introduction to becoming a metalhead, so I got into the old school thrash metal and death metal first. And so it was I almost worked my way backwards. I started out with a thrash metal and death metal. Then I went to the more traditional stuff Iron Maiden, Judas Priest. And then I even got into hair metal for a bit. I love Rat and Dokken. I think those bands have really awesome riffs. I know people think that those bands look goofy, and yeah, they do, but lots of really great guitar players in those bands. And so over time, I definitely did mellow out more, especially as my musical palette expanded, and I wasn't just listening to heavy metal anymore. And so now we'll get to my sophomore year of high school when I was playing football. And I know that might sound weird to some of y'all, wait a minute, you were playing sports this whole time? I actually was. Remember how I always said I was super tall? I was a really good basketball player. For a period of time, I was a pretty solid basketball player. I was living a double life, not just as creepy heavy metal guy, but also as an athlete. Ladies, get you a man who can do both. And so I played basketball from the time I was a little kid all the way up through middle school. Got really burned out on basketball. Then in high school, I switched to football and lacrosse. And, I was not a good football player. Anyone who played football with me could tell you that I was definitely pretty soft. As a tall, lanky, white guy, my only good attributes was that I was really, really fast. So I played a bit of wide receiver. Any position that involved tackling, I was horrible at. I think my total stats for my entire high school career, I think I had one catch for 11 yards on 5 targets, maybe a couple drops. I don't know. The point being, I wasn't very good. Though I did win Most Improved Player my freshman season when I was playing JV football, because even though I was not, a statistical superstar or anything like that, my coach was really impressed by my growth and development over the season in terms of practice and putting in effort. So he named me Most Improved Player on the team, and no, I never got my award plaque for it. They gave it to defensive MVP and offensive MVP, but never to me. So what's the deal, man? It's been 10 years. It's been 10 years. Where's my plaque? Okay, I'm still waiting for it. High school that I went to, you know who you are. But my sophomore year of high school, we got a new coach, and one of his demands almost was that I cut my hair. And this is something that a lot of football teams, I think, do. It's part of like high school football culture. Like everyone kind of like gets buzzed hair, at least where I was, and at least during this era, early 2010s. And I think it's kind of weird because long hair has definitely been normalized in football. Like I said, this was early 2010s. Clay Matthews was one of the faces of the NFL at this time. Like obviously I wasn't Clay Matthews out there on the field, right? But like football players had long hair. And it was common back then. Troy Polamalu, right? So the fact that like my coach and even some of my teammates were like, hey, Grant, you need to cut your hair. I kind of saw that as like, a conformist demand. And I was like, no, like what's the point? Like I'm comfortable having my hair long and, why would I just cut it just to like appease my coach? And that is one way I definitely thought I was like fulfilling my social outcast duty, was because James Hetfield of Metallica fame, allegedly, according to him, he had a similar story where he went out for high school football and his coach told him to cut his hair and he refused, so he just didn't make the team. So clearly that means I am just like James Hetfield from Metallica. But that's one thing where, like, looking back, on one hand, I am proud of myself for, standing up for, what I believed in, standing up for what you believe in and your values, like having long hair is a value. But it was an instance of standing up to peer pressure, which is good. But on the other hand, it is definitely something that could have been misconstrued by the coach as like, being willing to go to war almost, or have a standoff on something that's very trivial. Now, obviously, something like my haircut is not trivial to me. But for a lot of people, it'd be like, fine, whatever, I'll cut my hair to like, keep a job or keep up an appearance to get something else done. And the coach might have viewed my refusal to cut my hair as like, okay, he cares more about like his appearance than the team. And you can get into a whole back and forth of like, okay, well, why does he have to have short hair to be on the team or whatever, blah, 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 blah. The point is, I stayed on the team, but I really had to like fight and claw my way to like get into a starting position. I definitely think the coaches, in hindsight, probably held something against me because I held out and I said, no, I'm not going to do this. And so like there's lessons in everything. I don't even know why I really brought up that example, but that is like, in a way, it's kind of being like a cringy metalhead, like, oh, I'm not going to cut my hair for the man. But on the other hand, it's like, it's a good lesson of, what are your priorities? What do you value about, your lifestyle and your choices and your goals and your body and all that? And you should be able to say no to people. Just because you feel pressure to do something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And so at the end of the day, I don't even really know what the point of this video was. Maybe I just like oversharing on the internet like everyone else, but I'm hoping that maybe someone out there has, relatable stories that they can share in the comment section. Maybe you'll find some entertainment out of my dorky teenage antics. So if you can relate, leave a comment and a story if you want to. Maybe you had a similar phase to me. So yeah, just wanted to share that little fun chapter about a kind of a traumatic part of my life, low-key. But I'm gonna wrap it up here. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. If you made it all the way through the video, and like I said, this video is probably gonna be a rambling video over 20 minutes long. If you made it all the way through, you're the real MVP. Just smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you guys next time.